So I'm going to need you to keep trusting me. Trust me on this one. Jump into teaching as soon as possible. The best people who get into NLP or get into anything really in a teaching capacity are those who just go ahead and jump in. Prepare, of course, prepare your notes, make sure you know what you're talking about, etc. But then I want you to just jump in, because really all your preparation is, you're going to find, not really meaningless, but it's a very small percentage of what you really need as a teacher. So here's what I mean. You can prepare as a teacher. We'll call that 10% of what's really important. You preparing. That's you having a solid knowledge of NLP, knowing what you're going to say and how you're going to say it, etc. But that's only 10% of what's really important. The other 90% is your experience as a teacher. That's what's really important, because what you're going to find out is that some of the ways you thought you might present things aren't really going to work out. Some of the ways you didn't expect to present things are going to work out. There's a lot that happens when you actually teach, just like when you first jumped in and started working with clients, which I hope by now, if you took this to be a practitioner, I would hope by now you have a steady flow of clients and that you're working with people almost every day to help them change their lives. So it's the same as that. When you jumped in and started working with clients, you found out that when Steve shows you something on the board and then you take it to the clinic to do it, it's a little different. You have to remember what I said or what your other trainers said. You have to apply it, and then it doesn't always work out perfectly, or sometimes it gets changed, or sometimes maybe you forget a little piece of it and have to look at some notes or something like that. So when you jump into something, anything you're doing, when you jump in, you find out it's a lot different. Think about this. The astronauts going to the moon, okay? They can prepare, and I've seen footage from the, I believe it was the 1960s, of astronauts floating. I think they're in swimming pools trying to emulate the idea of lesser gravity and being suspended by strings and so forth, and practicing what it might be like to go to the moon, dealing with these centrifugal force, I believe it's called. Is you go around this thing and it pushes you really back, and smushes your face, and you get used to dealing with the force of increased G's as you leave the surface of the Earth. Do you really think that any of that actually completely prepared them for what they were going to experience? I think it was a good little taste. It was sort of like a sample, but I don't think that it really 100% prepared them for what they were going to experience. I'll be willing to bet that when they came back, that they would agree that 10% of their knowledge of how to fly through space and how to land on the moon and how to get off the moon, 10% of that came from their preparation, and 90% of it came from actually doing it. So the next time that they did it, they'd be much more prepared. So it's the same with this. You need to jump in as soon as possible, because only 10% is you taking those notes and preparing it and figuring out exactly how you're going to work with the students. And some people get really, really organized, and they make an exact plan for the day and so forth, just like they might do with a client. And then they find out that, well, they've got a, maybe a class clown, or they've got some people who really aren't grasping the concepts, or some people who like to talk a lot in class, which is fine, of course, and want to ask a lot of questions. Then what happens to 12 o'clock lunchtime after we learned A, B, and C? Well, it gets thrown off a little bit. So you have to be very open in your approach, at least initially when you're teaching. But there are also other times, as we'll see, when there's a necessity for laying down the law and saying, okay, we've got to learn this, and here's the plan, and this has got to happen. Because really what's got to happen is, A, they've got to learn this. Whatever you're teaching, they've got to learn that. But B, they've got to learn it in a way that makes sense for them and isn't overly rigid and so forth. Because really you want people to go home and say, hey, I had a great experience with so-and-so teacher. It was wonderful. You should take their training. You don't want people going home and saying, oh my goodness, you'll never guess what I just survived. So you want to make sure that you have a balance between what must be taught and how it should be taught. Okay, so let's talk about what's going to make you into a wonderful, powerful teacher. Well, first of all, I want you to start watching speeches. Speeches of people you really enjoy. If you enjoy watching the president talk and you feel he's a powerful speaker, go ahead and watch the president. Take notes, though. Take notes on what things you really like about that. Also, I want you to start paying attention to the words used in speeches. Sometimes people, especially presidential addresses, the words are very important. They're very carefully thought out. They're not just thrown out flippantly, offhand. Even if a major disaster happens and the president is addressing that, it's not something where he just ran up to the podium and said, "Hey folks, blah blah blah." It's planned out. It's mapped out. Even if there's just 10 or 20 minutes to put something together, something is put together. Something is assembled, and it's assembled in a way that's going to make sense to people. It's going to move people. It's going to get through to people. It's also going to convey all of the necessary information.